Good evening. My name is Yenikomshian, and I am the ANCA Silicon Valley Chair. I'd like to welcome you to the ANCA Artsakh Town Hall, hosted jointly with San Francisco and Silicon Valley. It's been an extremely difficult time for all of us, even more so for Armenians in Artsakh and Armenia. Before inviting our two distinguished colleagues to explain to you the larger scope of ANCA's immediate past and upcoming advocacy efforts in the US, let me give you a brief synopsis of what ANCA, San Francisco, and Silicon Valley have been diligently working on locally with a dedicated team of volunteers. Here's just a few of the things that we've been working on. We've hosted a number of town halls over the past few months relating to COVID-19, census, elections, and Artsakh. Since the onset of the Artsakh War, ANCA, San Francisco, and Silicon Valley have worked together to secure statements from San Francisco Mayor London Breed, San Jose Mayor Sam Liccardo, and the San Francisco and Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors resolutions condemning Azeri aggression. We've coordinated media response on behalf of the Bay Area American Armenian community, and we worked with congressional members and staff to support resolutions in Congress about Artsakh, including House Res 1165 and 1203. We've met with Jewish American organizations and the Israeli consul, successfully stopped several defense contractors who manufactured parts used in Turkish drones from selling supplies to Turkey and Azerbaijan. And we will continue with these projects. We have been able to do this all thanks to the support of our community, who have reached out to help in every way possible. We at ANCA will continue to do our work through the means available to us here in the United States to help Artsakh and Armenia. Now, I have the honor of introducing two guests for this evening, Aram Hamparian and Arsen Shirvanyan. Aram is joining us from DC, and he really doesn't need any introduction. What can I say about Aram? He embodies the values and is the personification of ANCA. He is the executive director of the Armenian National Committee of America in DC, serving as ANCA's representative to the administration, Congress, and the Washington foreign policy community. He's a graduate of the University of Massachusetts Amherst in political science, and he began working with ANCA in 1990. Arsen is joining us from Armenia, an extremely bright and capable young man, and so I'm so happy to see the next generation stepping in. Arsen Shirvanyan is the Government Affairs Director for the ANCA Western Region, and he was appointed in 2019. He is responsible for executing the legislative strategy of ANCA Western Region, building and cultivating working relationships with local and regional elected officials, as well as overseeing the ANCA-led initiatives such as High Votes and Census 2020. Arsen holds a bachelor's degree in history from the University of California, Berkeley, and he is currently a master's candidate in government studies at Johns Hopkins University's Advanced Academic Program. I'd like to mention that after the presentations, we will have a Q&A moderated by Roxanne Makasdjian, and we invite you to ask your questions via the webinar chat. Aram and Arsen, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Arsen, maybe you can start us off.
Sure. So to give you kind of the reality of what's been happening in Armenia right now, and also in Artsakh, since I was there last week, there's currently a huge crisis with the refugees coming from different places, and there are people who've been in Armenia for about 2 months now. They're specifically concentrated in Yerevan, in Goris, which is the bordering city to the Berzor or Lachin corridor, Jermuk, and many other large cities in Armenia. So, and they all have kind of differing needs. So some of them have real short time or real time needs, such as food, clothing, any type of shelter, that because some of them actually come from cities of Shushi and Hadrut, and they didn't have anything to bring with them because of the emergency call. And so what we see right now in Armenia is very troubling, and it's kind of a somber view to see a lot of people kind of struggle to kind of get by. So there are a number of organizations who try to do their best to kind of serve these people, but we also have to understand that there are thousands upon thousands of young men and women who have already died, and a lot of them are parents. So, I mean, just yesterday, an organization that I work with had served about a dozen or so families. Each of them had 4 to 5 kids. So if the breadwinner is not home and is I guess no longer available, it's they don't have anything else to get by. So that's kind of the situation. In Artsakh, the situation's even more troubling. There's no electricity, no gas. The internet's pretty bad, so they don't have decent access. And the government's trying to do its best to kind of serve the people, but and there are a lot of people that do try to go back. So, for instance, yesterday there were 3 full buses of at least 50 or so people in each bus, 13 buses, sorry, at least 50 people in each bus going back. But I guess the future is bleak, so they don't know what's going to happen next, and a lot of the folks who live in the bordering villages don't know what's going to happen, what the future holds for them. So, for instance, we know just recently Azerbaijan stole a number of villages right by the border, and about 2,000 people are now displaced. So a lot of people here, a lot of people in Artsakh live on a day-by-day basis. I mean, they don't know what the future holds for them, and that's very troubling.
Okay, Roxanne, I can share some thoughts, but I'll start by just sharing my admiration for Arsen and all those who are on the ground in Artsakh and Armenia today. Even in these dark days, I look at folks like Arsen and his generation, and I have hope for our future. We have a bright future. We have strong local chapters like in the Bay Area and Silicon Valley. We have extremely dedicated ANCA staff and supporters, and again, I've shared this a number of occasions. The courage that we're going to find in situations like this is going to come from each other, and I am hearing from Arsen and even very inspiring. Thank you, Arsen. Let me touch on the Washington aspect of this, and it's very troublesome because Washington is sadly less relevant to the situation than it was even 10 days ago. The result of very, very aggressive Turkish and Azerbaijani attacks, but also the U.S. being missing in action. I think that our advocacy, which is essential at moments like this, even when it can't accomplish all that we'd like, it falls into basically 3 categories. One is assistance, the humanitarian crisis that's taking place, and how the U.S. might address that. The second is the U.S. going to engage meaningfully in the OSCE Minsk Group process? Is there an OSCE Minsk Group process? What of this this deal that was forced on Armenia and Azerbaijan, is open to change? What is already baked in? Is the Turkish role going to be challenged in any way? Are we losing sovereignty over the south of Armenia, things of that sort. So that's a secondary. So the assistance, the engagement, we want a constructive U.S. engagement, and that becomes very complicated, and I'll explain that in a second. And then the third is, what might the U.S. do to deter renewed aggression? Because we've already seen 3 ceasefires breached, and you never know what the future holds. So let me touch on each of those. On assistance, there's like 2 categories of assistance and then 2 timelines for the assistance. The first category of assistance is simply emergency assistance, discretionary money that the administration can spend. They've only announced about 5 million. I understand they'll announce another 5 million maybe tomorrow. That's just a drop in the bucket. It's a small down payment on what's needed. What's needed is in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And that's not just for humanitarian aid. That's for reconstruction. That's for development, and even financial stabilization. The Armenian budget has taken brutal hits in the last 2 months. So that's the U.S., that's the international lending institutions, things of that nature. But that's an emergency assistance program. And then the second is an appropriated program. And the appropriated program obviously comes from Congress, and that takes weeks and months, not days and weeks. So we're obviously active on both fronts. Another angle is that the Millennium Challenge Corporation took Armenia out of eligibility over the last year or so because Armenia became a middle income country. Armenia will not be a middle income country according to World Bank statistics anymore, at least for the time being, and will become eligible, it would seem. So we need to push to see if Armenia can get a second compact. The last compact was in excess of 200 million. Those are the types of dollars that we need. In terms of engagement, the track record of the current administration has been extremely poor. They, literally, the National Security Advisor met with Armenia, expressed his sympathy with Armenians, noted that Azerbaijan and Turkey were the aggressive party, and then said, we're not going to take sides. As simple as that. It was an explicit statement that we will be neutral in this situation while nations of 100 million with massive armies, pummel a small country of 3 million, destroy the homes of people in Artsakh, a land of just 150,000. So that their definition of neutrality is, 30 to 1, 50 to 100 to 1 odds, staying neutral in that fight. I think that's a twisted version of neutrality. So that engagement we're pushing for it now. I understand that the U.S. negotiator is in Moscow and that there are discussions underway. It's unclear exactly what's going to happen, but our aim, and again, that doesn't always translate into reality, is to mitigate the worst of this agreement, to mitigate the worst of the harms imposed upon Armenia, the long-term harms that will, handicap Armenia for decades and decades into the future. That's number one, and you do that A, under the Trump administration, and then B, we're engaged with the Biden people, but that feels like it's 100 years away. It's about 65 days away, but that's a lifetime when it comes to how quickly things have developed. In terms of deterrence, Ani mentioned our efforts trying to stop some drone parts. In many ways, that's the horse has left the barn. A lot of those parts obviously were used, right? So we need to make those companies, they should pay a price for what they did. And if they broke the law, they should be held accountable for breaking those laws. And if there is going to be new aggression, we have to make sure that the U.S. is in no way involved in that process. So that's partially drones, which is like can be a community thing, but more significantly, it's the U.S. government saying no more arms sales to Turkey, no more arms sales to Azerbaijan, and also suspending or stopping, freezing forever the U.S. military aid program to Azerbaijan that provided them with like $120 million. So on all of those fronts, we need to push. I share with great regret that the type of sanctions that were needed and that we pushed for with our Greek friends and really a bipartisan majority in Congress were these caps of sanctions, really, really serious sanctions that Turkey violated the terms of these sanctions long ago, 4 years ago, by buying Russian weapon systems. The administration just chose not to enforce them. Those were the type of crippling sanctions that would have gotten Turkey's attention. It became clear to us, as this war progressed, that if the United States wasn't willing to, be serious about, a NATO ally buying Russian weapon systems, they certainly were going to take a stand on behalf of the Armenians, and that's where a difference might have been made. There's several pieces of legislation. Ani mentioned them. There's 2 in the House, one dealing more with condemning Turkey and Azerbaijan, that Congressman Spear put forward, and the other dealing more with self-determination for Artsakh, and that's Congressman Palone's. It's very late in the session. We're looking for every opportunity. It's hard to get things done in this lame duck session, but nonetheless, that's a priority for us. There are twin measures in the Senate that Senator Menendez put forward that would scrutinize sort of the abuses and aggression by Turkey and Azerbaijan with an eye toward cutting off military and security assistance to those countries. Of course, that's an important resolution, but again, that's like weeks and months. It's not a solution that's going to help us in the near term, but nonetheless, one that we support very strongly. You guys are all familiar, I'm sure, with efforts to get lobbyists that work for Turkey and Azerbaijan to drop those contracts. And we saw DLA Piper and Mercury and Livingston and others do that. Others have hung on, like BGR Group and things of that nature. We're also working with experts in the field and other civil society groups on the monuments issue. Forgive me if I'm cynical on that front. We witnessed in 2005 the wholesale destruction of the Julfa Cemetery, a UNESCO protected site, and UNESCO never said a word. So nonetheless, that effort needs to be undertaken, and there are friends in Congress and elsewhere who can help with that. There's the Metropolitan Museum, there's ECOMOS, there's all these various institutions that can be helpful on that front. We can't discount that. We need to push for every site to be saved, and we'll certainly push on that front. I share all of this with a sense of frustration that Washington was not in any way able to constrain or restrain Turkey in this case. Historically, the United States has played a role in restraining Ankara. The same is true of the Europeans. The U.S. just didn't engage, and that weighs very heavily on all of our shoulders.
Aram, thank you very much for that. A few questions have come in. Anna asks that there are reports of civilians, Armenian civilians that have been captured by the Azeris, and maybe 10, maybe 20. Is there anything the ANC can do about this? Is there anything the public can do about this, as well as the issue of war crimes? Is there anything we can do on this front?
Well, we share these atrocities, the torture of Armenians who've been captured, the desecration of churches, the vandalization of churches. We saw that today in Shushi, the kidnapping of Armenians who've sought to return home. These are all shared with the people who are supposed to care and are supposed to make sure that these atrocities inform their relationship with, in this case, Turkey and Azerbaijan. And, again, forgive me for being cynical, but these are passed along, and I don't see them being taken seriously. And, what we would like to see, right, is that when we can document terrible atrocities that are being committed by Turkey and Azerbaijan, that we share them with our government, and then our government, weighs them, studies them, investigates them on their own. And if they find that there are, in fact, these types of kidnappings or tortures and other horrific actions, that we would call balls and strikes. We would call out Azerbaijan for their sins. And instead, the dominant paradigm is something like, well, to do so would mean that we weren't neutral. And it's in that hell that we find ourselves, where the group that you would think that the United States, which has historically played some role as an arbiter of what crosses the line, of what is that the U.S. would play some role in that regard, they've knowingly, consciously, and openly said that, well, that we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that, because I have yet to see one statement from the U.S. government, and this is I take this as my failing, right? I have yet to see one statement from the U.S. government that meaningfully calls out Baku for anything that they've done in this over the last 2 months. That includes, this may be an unfair comparison. This may be an unfair comparison, but 100 years ago, we did have an ambassador, Henry Morgenthau, who did speak the truth and did protest. he protested to the Ottoman government, and he protested to the American government, and eventually he went public and wrote a book and raised funds and I think represented America in our best tradition, as Americans. And I've seen absolutely none of that from the Department of State. They count themselves, I guess, professional to the extent that they can absolutely disregard the brutal slaughter of a nation on their indigenous homeland.
Thank you. Question from Naidi. Actually, I must tell attendees that I'll need to shorten some answers, and we might not get to all the questions. But Naidi's a supporter of the ANCA, but she's beginning to question, you know, the efficacy of our lobbying efforts. She wants to understand, you know, it doesn't feel like the US has intervened in substantive means. They support Turkey much more than Armenia, of course. So she asks, the US funds given to Armenia are diminishing every year. With the current situation of Russia acting as a peace broker, so to speak, for Armenia and Azerbaijan, do we really expect there will be any significant or positive outcomes from our lobbying efforts? A lot has changed recently. What's your new assessment?
And those are fair points, and I'm not going to dispute anything that you raised. I would say this, that in the first weeks of the conflict, to the extent that American officials, right, spoke out, it was entirely from Congress, and you saw, I think, very quickly about 100 members of Congress speak out. Every one of them spoke out on a side, took the Armenian side. Everyone that criticized the side criticized Turkey and Azerbaijan. Not a single voice, at least in the Senate and House, had anything critical to say of Armenia or anything kind to say about Ankara and Baku. And I think that was bipartisan. It reflected maybe legislators from 20, 30 different states. So it wasn't just California, Massachusetts. And I think that was the result of work on our part to educate people about the situation on the ground, the stakes, things of that nature, the continuity from 1915, things of that nature. Where we proved ineffective was in changing the Trump administration's outlook. I think it was a general outlook, which is that we're not an international policeman, and we simply, not every problem around the world needs to be an American problem. And we were unable to move that. Maybe that may be a constant across many different Trump policies. It's not as though he simply chose the Armenian issue to sit on the sidelines. That seems like a pattern with this administration. And in fact, one that's considerably different than almost any US administration since the Second World War, because they've all seen themselves in some way as a problem solver or a solution provider, things of that nature. And I will say this, that our strategy was based on a US administration that would engage, that would not see a global crisis and just view it as like, a show to be viewed or a show to be watched. And the congressional power could help push that about, that you could work through legislation, you could work through appropriations, there's various different vehicles. And it turns out that this administration never flashed the red light to Ankara on this issue. And I think that sadly contributed to the outcome. So yeah, if there are folks who know how or who knew how to have gotten Trump to stop Turkey on this issue, even at this late date, we'd love to hear from them.
That brings just up the question a little, to take it a little farther. Was the US just standing on the sidelines, or is it increasingly looking like they wanted to see their NATO ally Turkey move into this area and be that power that fights back against Russia there?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I know the geopolitics of exactly what the administration was thinking. Arsen, any Any thoughts from the ground about?
I mean,
insights about-
right. I mean, I will add to what Aram mentioned before, that, you know, we as ANCA and from the Western region as well, we've been working diligently day in, day out to try to push the administration to move at least an inch into the direction of peace. And unfortunately, for quite some time, it didn't happen. But that was a consistent effort on behalf of the Trump administration, because if we look back to 2019, the Turkish government basically launched, the Turkish military launched an attack on Syria, northern Syria, and just slaughtered thousands upon thousands of Kurds, ethnic Kurds, and nobody did a thing about it. So that was a consistent kind of a policy. So it wasn't just that the Armenian advocacy kind of decreased in its importance or anything. That was a consistent Trump policy. And as far as the geopolitics is concerned, I think that was in one way or another the result of Trump administration's incompetence, complete incompetence to actually engage before the current horrible agreement was signed, because as we heard a couple of days ago, basically that was just pushed upon Pashinyan to sign, and he said well, I don't want to get into the civil politics, the internal politics of this, but he said he didn't have time to consult with the rest of the OSCE Minsk group partners. So had the Trump administration actually increased beforehand, I think we would have seen a different results than we see now.
And Aram, you still have, the last part of Naidi's question was kind of still up in the air, and that is like, do we still have faith, or do we still have expectations that we think could be feasible, that from our lobbying efforts, from those issues that you mentioned earlier? Do you feel like they can?
Yeah, I'll go through the three priorities I mentioned at the outset.
Yeah.
Right? On two of them, I'm generally positive. One of them, we'll wait and see. The first is assistance. Yes, we can help with assistance. And we can help with assistance by pushing this administration to greater or lesser effect, but certainly an incoming Biden administration, for the type of development and reconstruction numbers that we need to see. That should be our priority. And we've done that in the past. Hundreds of millions have gone to Armenia over the past several decades. And the need today is greater than ever. So yes, we can be effective on that front. We've proven that. Number one.
You think there's better chances with Biden? A question coming in from Gary.
Yeah, I would say that. The Biden tends to be more of a traditional foreign policy practitioner, internationalist of that sort. So yeah, international assistance plays more of a role in his world than it did in Trump, with Trump. So yes, we can be effective in the aid front, and we have to be. There's people, as Arsen knows and sees with his eyes, people who need help, and we have to help them. On the third point, which is deterrence, yes. Again, the horse has left the barn on many of these things, at least in this round of aggression. But we can play a role in terms of stopping arms sales, suspending the military aid program. Those are doable things. Enforcing Section 907, if you believe Vice President Biden's statement, he says he'll do that, or he indicated he would do that. So stopping the arms sales, preventing, suspending the military aid program to Baku, enforcing 907. Those are three doable asks that we have to push extremely hard on. No one's going to give those tests. We have to fight for those like crazy. And then asking for oversight and investigation into the U.S. parts and components technology that ended up in these Bayraktar drones. Yes, those should be pursued. They should be pursued by ANC, but also by lawyers. And by, we need to identify people who were harmed by those and find out how they can have standing in U.S. courts, and then, pursue those legally, and also through congressional oversight and things of that nature. So I would say, I feel strong about our humanitarian push. I feel good about our deterrence push. Like, we can hack away at the U.S. security relationship with Turkey and Azerbaijan. Where I'm less optimistic, just because I don't know what the thinking is among the very top level Trump administration officials, is in terms of like revisiting this deal. Will they revisit it in a way that's worse? It's hard to imagine that, but hell, right? Anything's possible. So I don't know that we have our hand on that steering wheel. I think that's the U.S. has been very absent. They're stepping in late in the game. The French are also doing their part. Can this be rewritten in some way that's less damaging to Armenian viability? That's our effort, but with less guarantee of success.
So yes, there were numerous questions about the agreement and how much you think it might be changeable still, like the road between Nakhichevan and Armenia, etc. And also this idea about remedial secession and the possibilities for that. And should we here be pushing that?
Arsen, any thoughts about the road to Nakhichevan? Is there? I can't imagine that's a very popular component of this deal in either Artsakh or Armenia.
Yeah, definitely not. And I think a lot of this actually just depends on, at this point, at least at this stage, is how what Russia decides. And we've seen that for the past week or so, whether it's about the road and how that's going to play out. The Armenian government says that it's not going to cut off our the border with Iran. The Azeri government is saying something different and conflicting at times. But as far as the rest of the deal goes, it's everything is just on a day-by-day basis. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, 2,000 people were just suddenly decided just like that they're no longer going to be living in a place that they lived for 2,000 years. So.
Forgive me if you answered specifically, Aram or Arsen, about these civilians that have been captured. There are numerous questions coming in on chat about that, and what can be done to help speed their release.
I mean, sharing it with our government is our first response to that, but we do so without great faith that much will be done about it. We press, we push. I know the embassy here is pressing and pushing as well. I'm not very confident the U.S. government is going to expend a lot of capital on this. I guess the best indication of how much capital they'll expend on this is how much capital they expended over the last 50 days on any number of atrocities. And again, I'll go back to the National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien, who said in front of a group of Armenians that for us to take side would be to abandon our neutrality. And, the fiction there, and it's easy to get bitter about these things, the fiction there is that the neutrality is being preserved toward what end? Like, what did you do with your neutrality? What you sat on the sidelines and you maintained your purity. And what do you got to show for it? Right. It was a talking point they threw out right before an election in some kind of like cynical gesture, so they don't appear, quite so heartless to the Armenian electorate, perhaps in Michigan or Wisconsin, Pennsylvania.
When neutrality, it seems to me that when neutrality behooves the aggressor, it's no longer neutrality.
Yeah, if you see 50 people beating up one person in the middle of the street, and you decide to walk by in the name of neutrality, well, that's simply not neutrality.
Right. Ada asks if you can share with us how well organized and influential the Turkish and Azeri lobbying organizations are. Do you have an ear to that? Can you tell, and how?
I think that their influence in DC is geopolitical, and like, for example, I'll use the metric of members of Congress. Like, no legislators, not even the heads of the Turkish or Azeri caucuses, defended Turkey or Azerbaijan during this period. So what they did was just play geopolitical cards, at high levels, and talking to Europe about energy supply, talking to the U.S. about Iran and Israel. And I think those are the cards they played. And I don't think they played lobbying cards. I mean, they did probably have some, bot farms and things of that nature just to, torture Armenians, because that's apparently very popular in Ankara and Baku. And like when they saw DLA and others drop their contracts, I don't think their influence, I didn't see any shift in U.S. policy. So if you were to test that proposition by saying, well, they had these lobbyists on the payroll, and then they didn't have the lobbyists on the payroll, was there a delta between those two periods? I think they played geopolitical cards, and we played in the U.S. context citizen cards, right? And as it turns out, our foreign policy establishment is sometimes more responsive to foreign interests than even American citizens.
Mm-hmm. Arsen, can you tell us what, you were talking about all these, all the refugees with nothing, and that the government is trying to do what it can, but it's not able to help all of them in every way. How do you see, are you able to see exactly what the government is doing? Is the food and clothing and other needs getting to these people? As usual in these kind of humanitarian crises, we hear about warehouses full of humanitarian aid that aren't being delivered to people. Do you have a sense, being on the ground, of whether or not that's being carried out?
Yeah, so to a certain extent, some of the shipment that was shipped out from the U.S. has been held for the time being, for unknown reasons, at least to me. There are a lot of things that have been shipped out over the last couple of weeks, actually, so we'll see when that gets released, and there have been calls and appeals to kind of fast track that process. In terms of the Armenia funds money allocation, that hasn't been determined, as we've seen a couple of days ago. Actually, the Deputy Prime Minister answered a question at the National Assembly that part of the money has been donated to the government, and the other part is still being determined. Well, the problem with still being determined is that there are people who are I wouldn't say that you walk around the streets and you see people literally like sleeping on the streets, but it's almost something close to that. So, for instance, the government had promised that they would take care of the food issue. One of the organizations that I work with serves about 2,000 people every single day, and I think just about 100 that I met that I talked to yesterday said that last time they received food was 3 days ago, and it was some Iranian type of pasta, and very low quality, along with olive oil. So I mean, it's very heartening to see that. So and then in addition to that, the clothing issue. So especially the residents or the refugees that left from Shushi and Hadrut and some of the other neighboring areas came without a bag, just literally just left their cities. And right now what we're trying to do, and I'm working with a number of organizations on this, is to try to get either used or new clothing to help them in whatever capacity that we can. You also have to understand that most of the refugees are also kids. The Artsakh region had one of the highest birth rates or the highest birth rate in the Caucasus, for a time being at least. And so each family has 3, 4, 5, 6. Yesterday I saw 3 families who had 7 kids. I mean, an amazing, families that, and 2 of them had lost their, the breadwinners during this war. So there are all of these issues where you have, these kids that don't have anything to eat or to take care of. So the good thing on the other end is that a lot of people who are not even engaged with any organization specifically, but are just, on their own, or have taken the initiative to kind of get out there and do whatever they possibly can. And so I'm hoping that in the next couple of days, one of the organizations that I work with that are mainly from Shushi will have a long-term food solution for the next at least 3 months. And so that's almost being done. And then we've also connected with the Department of Emergency Situations. So they'll be handing out, and we sent an appeal or a request to provide with a couple of hundred blankets, winter blankets, toothpaste, laundry detergent, and other things just for people to get by. And we haven't received a response yet, but I think there are some storages. It's just a matter of communication and a coordination that hasn't been as effective, and I think that's partially due to the unprecedented level of the crisis that we've seen at this time. And I think nobody predicted this, or the Armenian government in this case didn't predict that it would get this bad. So hopefully, in time they'll have a better coordinating system.
Okay, thank you. There are numerous questions about international issues, and I'm not sure, maybe Aram, I don't know to what extent ANC gets involved in any kind of, we mentioned earlier, war crimes trials, the situation with the heritage issues with UNESCO, and whether the ANC can and does get involved in that. Can you talk about that a little?
I mean, the question is like the intersection between the US and these international bodies. Obviously, we're not a stakeholder for, let's say, UNESCO. Countries are the stakeholders of UNESCO. So UNESCO is most responsive to members of the United Nations. So the same is true of the International Court of Justice, or even the ICC, to the extent that members or countries are members of that body. So they're the stakeholders, they're the constituents. Doesn't mean citizens can't push, and that we should push the US government to be active on this issue. Again, the dilemma is, I look back at Julfa, the destruction of the Armenian cemetery, thousands of Khachkars in Julfa. The U.S. State Department official at the time was Matt Bryza, if you recall that name. He was the U.S. ambassador, later rejected by the Senate to serve as the U.S. ambassador in Azerbaijan. And I recall hearing in those days that the State Department couldn't really get involved in the Julfa issue because, again, that would be taking sides, and that might set back the cause of peace, that we need to preserve our neutrality. So thousands of Khachkars get turned to dust, and no comment, because it's actually virtue. It's a U.S. virtue that they can't speak on the issue because that would be taking sides. And I think a lot of this ends up in that exact paradigm. So you can have, and you will have, members of Congress call for investigations. You have members of Congress call for prosecutions, things of that nature. Will that translate in the next 65 days into the Trump administration doing much? I would guess no, but nonetheless, we have to push. Would we have more traction under a Biden administration? Likely yes, but again, that once the transactions are being done at the level like state-to-state transactions, very often our issue gets bartered away, right? And that our role as citizens gets like watered down because we, let's say, build up the let's say a monuments issue to the point where it has political currency in the U.S. And then some very wily people at the Department of State then say, well, here's a developed issue. Let's see what we can trade that for with the Aussies. We can not pursue this issue, but in return for get something else. And unfortunately, that's not an excuse for not doing stuff, but it's just an honest appraisal of how hard it's been to get the U.S. on the right side of this issue, at least under this administration. Again, I say that like with feeling the weight of that on my shoulders. Like that Arsen mentioned that it's not simply an Armenian issue, but nonetheless, it is also an Armenian issue, and one that worked entirely against us this time around.
Somebody, Daniel is asking if we could take a step back and talk about the whole ceasefire agreement and what it means. Does ANC have a particular perspective on the agreement itself, and how it came about, and how we view it?
I think anybody who looks at that agreement, anybody, on any side of the issue would see it as a disaster for the Armenian nation. That's, I don't think, a political judgment. I don't think there's anyone out there above the age of 6 who's defending it as a net plus for the Armenians. It's obviously not. It represents, in fact, like a viability challenge to the future of the Armenian people and their ancient homeland. So yeah, I think the agreement is disastrous, and we should seek any angle, even long shot, to try to revisit, rewrite, take a second look at the terms, take a second look at the timelines, stretch out the timelines, revise the terms, mitigate the worst harms. I think that's, I don't think that's necessarily an ANC position. I think that's an Armenian position today, that this was a disastrous deal.
And by disastrous, I mean, Daniel asked specifically, is it accurate to say, as many are saying, it was a capitulation and a surrender? I don't know if he's asking if it was.
I don't know what words are the best word, Roxanne. I can say this: extremely negative, to the extent that it creates viability challenges for the Armenian homeland. I'll leave it at that. People can make their own judgments, and certainly, I mean, I have my personal views on the subject of how we got here. I'm sure everyone who's watching today has views as well. I would invite Arsen to offer thoughts as well. But yeah, I don't think any Armenian anywhere with a brain in their head is positive about this. And I think we all realize we have to roll back the worst parts of this to the extent that we can.
Yeah, I'll just add to that not everything is over yet, because as we've seen just in the last week, I mean, just first of all, the deal itself was just made in such a haste and fast manner that the dates have changed and have been revised. So if dates can be changed, and if territories can be changed or the revised as far as the map goes and whatnot, I think a lot can be changed as well. So nothing has been, nothing is final yet, and it's our duty, responsibility, and our right to continue to push forth as much as we possibly can to make whatever we can, the best of whatever we can out of this situation. I know it's not what we desire, what we see, but it's our right, duty, and responsibility as Armenians, as Armenian Americans, also as citizens of the United States who have who vote, who pay taxes, and who do everything to push as much as we possibly can to get to make this less worse, I guess.
Totally agree with Arsen. Arsen's exactly right. Exactly right.
A question about just generally, Jack, the fact that, we know here in the Bay Area, there are several Congress people who have been extremely supportive of our issues, like Jackie Spear, who is the Armenian Caucus co-chair. Who is it that you're working closest with and in Congress, and how can we help here communicate with those people?
Well, definitely stay in touch with Congresswoman Spear, who's the author of HRES 1165. We want that to pass this session. If it can't pass this session, it needs to pass early in the next session. She's on top of this, and so working with her and her staff is vital. Congresswoman Eshoo has a long history of working on religious freedom issues and the protection of religious minorities in the Middle East, and has actually worked with senior Republicans in partnership with Congressman Fortenberry and others. They don't have a lot in common politically, but they've worked really well together. Congressman Fortenberry represents a lot of Yezdis in his district in Nebraska. Congresswoman Eshoo is, of course, of Armenian and Assyrian heritage, and they've made a great partnership. So I think supporting that partnership, I think, would also be important. But I would turn to Arsen. He's our Californian on the team.
Well, I think it's very important as far as in California delegation to work with both Democrats and Republicans, whether it's Devin Nunes. Well, that kind of goes to the Central Valley, but still, just Zoe Lofgren, Jackie Spear, Nancy Pelosi, whoever it is. I mean, first and foremost, we have to understand that this is not a partisan issue. If anybody here has a R or a D next to their names, forget that for a second. We have a homeland to protect, and we have to work with anybody that we possibly can. If you represent the R or the D next to your name, you have to first and foremost criticize your own party or push your party, not criticize, but push your own party to do as much as they possibly can to be on the right side of the history and have your own party be push for that as far as the condemnation, sanctions, the $250 million that ANCA is advocating to be allocated to Armenia. All of this. So it doesn't matter who it is in California delegation that, your representative is, just push them as much as you possibly can to get on the right side of the history. We've previously worked with, so many that I can possibly think of. There are, I believe, 53 representatives just in California. We've worked with most of them, and we as ANCA, and we will continue to work with most of them, and we'll push, and at the same time push all of them to do as much as they possibly can to, be on the right side of history and advocate for Armenian issues, Armenian rights.
Can you talk about the kind of political strategy or thinking and reasoning behind pushing for recognition for Artsakh in our states, in the federal government, by the new Biden administration? Is it any more hopeful than it was before, or is it any more necessary or useful now than it was before? Can you give a little sense of the politics around independence for Artsakh?
I think recognition of Artsakh should remain like a very, very high priority, more urgent now than ever. The idea, the arguments for recognition, the arguments for independence or separate status for Artsakh, not part of Azerbaijan, let's say, historically have fallen into two categories. One is the historical, right, which is the thousands of years of presence, the continuity of population, all that historical. That's a historical claim. Then there's the legal claim that the way the Soviet Constitution was written, the way Artsakh seceded according to that Constitution, the way it seceded the same way Azerbaijan seceded, and that Artsakh was never part of an independent Azerbaijan. So there's also that legal argumentation, and that has been articulated, I think, very clearly over the years. The third, and I think the one that matters the most, is the survival base, which is that given the holy hell that's been visited upon the people of Artsakh, they can never, if there's one Armenian who can be kept out of the hands of Azerbaijan so that they won't be tortured and mutilated on video, then they should be. And this is, I had a conversation with some university students, some law students who played the legal card, who argued the legal claim that Azerbaijan has, it's legally part of Azerbaijan and all that. And I said, the way I explained it is this. Okay, you have a foster parent, let's say, and they have custody of children. And maybe they believe that they have some biological or historical claim to those children and that family. Maybe they can make that claim. And then second, maybe they have a piece of paper that says that the court assigned those children to them, so God damn it, those are their kids. How much of a beating do those children have to take? How many bones do they have to break? How many of those children do they have to kill before the legal argument doesn't matter and the historical argument doesn't matter, whatever side you want to argue it, and you just get those children the hell out of that family? That's the situation we're in today, where we have this so-called custodian, in Latin they say in loco parentis, acting as the parent who's in fact the killer, right? And So I think if there was a strong argument to be made on the historical ground, I think that is certainly valid. And there's equally valid claim to be made legally that Artsakh has every right to be independent and has never been part of Azerbaijan. But the one that matters the most today is if they're part of Azerbaijan, they will kill them. They will kill them. Not in theory, not a prediction, not we think this might happen. No, it is happening today. That there are people being kidnapped today. There are people being, I'm sure, killed today. That their houses were bombed, their hospitals were bombed, their schools were bombed. This is their destiny under Azerbaijan, and God willing, the French and others will do the right thing. I'm not sure when America will show up. Maybe we may be the last to recognize at this rate, but recognition, I think, remains a really, really important priority. Again, Arsen, you're closer to the situation, so that's just wanted to offer my 2 cents.
I'm scanning through questions that have already been answered. Since the signing of the disastrous ceasefire deal, Armenians have divided into 2 sides. It seems unity has become a dirty word. What would you say to those, especially in the diaspora, who are shouting at one another about who was right and who was wrong, to unite all behind not any one individual, but behind the Armenian cause? Do you think a show of leadership in the diaspora would help quell internal tensions and get our people to focus their energy on effecting positive efforts?
I'm glad to talk about that. Please.
Yeah. One thing I'll say is it doesn't really whatever side that you're on, you have to understand first and foremost that the most critical thing right now is the matter of refugees and what happens to them. If our land doesn't have Armenians, then we're one step closer to giving it up. Right now, there are about 90,000 refugees, just about spread all over Armenia, and as I mentioned, and I noted a couple of things just about the food shortages, the blankets that they don't have, just the basic necessities where they can't take care of themselves. If this continues the same way, these people will leave, and we won't have the historical indigenous population that we once had in Artsakh. So we must do whatever we possibly can to at least give some attention. So if you care about either side, if you care about the land, if you care about what the outcome was, you also have to put some thought into the fact that there are 90,000 Artsakh people in Armenia who have nothing to eat, nothing to care for. They stay in hotels, 7, 8 of them in one small room in studios. So in whatever capacity, if you care about what's been happening, we also have to understand that these refugees need to go back. They have to have a viable, a secure, the necessities have to be taken care of in a way where they can feel safe going back to Artsakh, to Stepanakert, to Martuni, and whatever the other and the other regions that they're from, and also the refugees from Shushi and Hadrut, at least where they, if hopefully they could go back to go to Stepanakert and continue their livelihood. But we have to understand the catastrophe that these people are experiencing. So if you care about the politics of this, just you also have to put some thought into assisting these refugees, because this is critical right now.
A couple questions about the Red Cross. Do either of you know to what extent the Red Cross is stepping in? And
I'll be happy to answer.
Yes.
So at the moment, they're doing exchange of the bodies on both sides. The latest was that they had exchanged a total of 385, or they mediated the exchange of 385 deceased soldiers or killed soldiers. There has been I think $5 million allocated to them by the U.S., from what I recall, to continue with their efforts and assist them with either retrieving bodies or mediating on some basic kind of logistics. So if you go to the borders, like, if you pass by Shushi, for example, the Red Cross, the Armenian side of the military, and also the Azeri military, they kind of coordinate. So they play kind of a coordinating role in a lot of the in a lot of these mediations, just on a basic ground level kind of work that's happening and has to be somehow coordinated between the Armenians and Azeri dictatorial, government. So.
There's a question about China being more and more involved in this area, Russia and China working together, and the question of whether or not we as ANC in the US could take advantage of anti-China sentiment in Congress for our own aims in that area?
I'm not sure. We have to think about that a little bit. I haven't thought of that. But obviously, like, it's a geopolitical nexus of a lot of interests, and the one thing we know is that historically, at least since the fall of the Soviet Union, that the U.S. was a player in that region, and then chose to disengage, and what happened is at least partially the result of that.
Arsen, there are, again, reports about Armenia funds still having a lot of undistributed funds. Is there anything we can do to change that if that's truly the case?
Yeah, that is true. And I think a lot of it is just the domestic, the infrastructure, where the bureaucracy that they have to kind of figure out themselves. Yes, on our end, maybe the funds that you gave, reach out to Armenia Fund, have them fast track this, because at this point there are tons and tons of just basic things, supplies that have been sent out and are being held. The money is still, at least in part, hasn't been allocated to the refugees, and the other half has been donated immediately. So if you have their contact information, reach out to them. That was your money that you sent, whether $50, $100, or $2,000 that you sent out to them. They have it, and you sent it. So you should hold them accountable.
I just, to add to Arsen, from what Arsen said, it seems like $1 today is worth many dollars a week, a month, a year from now. Like, this is the time when that money needs to be allocated to feed people, to house people, and to return people. So this is like, the urgency of that allocation is great urgency. It's like, this is the time to do that. This is not the time to sit tight and say, well, we need, a long-term plan. The long-term plan is not going to be possible if, as Arsen said, the people have left their homes with no hope of return. So this is the time.
Is the recommendation to continue, especially giving through the Armenia Fund? We have the telethon coming up next week.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah,
definitely. I would also add that if you the donating to Armenia Fund is definitely helpful, and we should continue as much as we possibly can. But if you also know any small organizations, people on the ground that are helping out in whatever capacity that they are helping, as individuals, as organizations, chip in, help them, ask them if they need any assistance. There are so many organizations led by, young, active folks who, are donating their time and money and helping out the people in whatever capacity that they can. So the smaller organizations have a more direct and immediate impact. So the things that I mentioned previously, like things like getting blankets or food, while the government is still processing or thinking about what its final the allocation should be, we have to understand there are people starving. So if you know of any smaller organizations on the ground that are helping and doing things, chip in whatever you can. There are a lot of organizations that do amazing work here.
Switching gears just a little bit, and you're not lawyers, so I don't know if you can answer this, but the question of, we did a lot of work here, as Ani mentioned, towards these tech companies who sold materials to Turkey that they've used in the drones. Would there be any possibility of bringing a case against the Turks in the US courts for using US technology to kill Armenians?
It would be harder to take an action, I think, against Turkey, but it might be easier to take action against the actual companies. If they were negligent or intentionally provided these outside of US law and they ended up killing Armenians, then they should be held accountable. Several of them have said they'll conduct investigations. Well, none of them have announced their investigations. So like lawsuits are a possibility, number one. Number two, if they've broken the law, the US government should prosecute them. Probably need to be encouraged to do so. And third, there should be congressional oversight over these companies. Most of them have said things like, well, they weren't aware of this and things of that nature. You know what? Let's test that. We should test that. Now, I don't think we owe we don't owe anyone the suspension of our mental faculties or our cynicism or skepticism or disbelief. Let them prove, and they should do that through investigation. So I don't think that chapter is over in the least. And the fact that somebody took the trouble to write, a statement that they posted on their social media, it's a tiny step in the right direction, but it's in no way remedies the harm that was done, and in no way exonerates them from any guilt for their actions. If they've broken the law and they've caused harm to people, then they should pay a price for that.
Okay, one last question here, and that is regarding specifically the State Department. What have our relationships been like lately? Especially, there's been so much turmoil in the State Department during the Trump administration. Is there any specific thing we do or will do differently in our contacts with them regarding Artsakh?
I don't think that they've responded especially well to the pressure from the Armenian American community and also from our congressional friends. And I think that, their instinct perhaps was to get defensive and to, dismiss sort of public concerns or even congressional concerns, and perhaps to feel as though that they're insulated from that public discourse. And they're not. They're public servants like everybody else. They have no special entitlement. They're not immune to criticism. Certainly their record is, I think, a terrible one in this case, and they should answer for it. But instead they just kind of circle the wagons and point fingers and do some victim blaming and all the rest. And they extremely low scores on this front. And part of that is from the top, from the president's indifference. And part of that is just the groupthink that has taken over that building, and this fake sense of neutrality, the whole range of pathologies that are at play. But these are our diplomats, and we're going to continue to press forward with them. I think we're not going to take it easy on anybody. No one deserves a free pass here, and if that is tough for folks to swallow, then too bad.
Well, I'd like to close, but first I'd like to give you both a chance to say some closing thoughts. I sense a little bit in the questions and also in conversations with my fellow Bay Area Armenian Americans that I think we all feel ready to do more and give more, but we're feeling maybe more helpless than even before right now, and just kind of wondering whether all these efforts that we have been doing, especially with all the lobbying going on, whether they're having an effect, and whether and should we keep going? What should we be doing? Maybe you can both speak to that.
I can take a first crack and say this, that if we were to retreat from, let's say, the public policy field, it's not as though like our departure would somehow be met with, let's say, an Azeri Turkish departure from that field. If there's a equilibrium that's been reached, or like their front lines, this trench warfare, if we just disappear, it just gives the other guy free reign. So, and that's a luxury. It is easy to throw up your hands, and God knows, I think we've all felt that. Like, these have been some dark days, and none of us have been super happy or happy at all with where things are. There's certainly a lot of things that that are brutal and bitter for all of us. But retreating from that field isn't the solution. It isn't the solution at all. Let me just reserve my final words for Arsen, and say I'm a bit older than Arsen, and I guess I'm entitled to say how very proud I am of Arsen and the generation he represents. And they have had just really just remarkable strength and courage, and they're smart as can be, hardworking as can be, and as devoted as can be. And our nation is in good hands. So I just offer my respect to Arsen and all that he represents in his generation, and many thanks, of course, to our ANC team in the Bay Area and Silicon Valley.
Thank you. Arsen?
Well, Aram is always too kind, and I've definitely learned a passion from a lot of the experience that I've had is experiences I've definitely learned from Aram and many other activists, Armenian American activists in the U.S. who have been fighting for decades now. Aram has been fighting just as long as I've been alive, so, and just in ANCA. So imagine. As far as the work goes, I mean, you mentioned that a lot of people feel helpless. I understand that, and I felt that as well. But this is not the time to feel helpless. If you feel helpless, imagine I mean, just yesterday, as I mentioned, 13 buses full of 50 people in each bus went back to Stepanakert. Stepanakert is literally covered, is on three fronts. Has the enemy front on three sides. So if they can do that in this most hopeless situation, when there's no gas, there's no electricity, there's no Wi-Fi, I think you can do. You can move forward too. We have to think rationally. We have to organize. I know the situation doesn't. We don't see the best at this moment, but we have to really start thinking rationally and logistically as to what we're going to do. What are our next steps? If you live in the United States, what is something that ANCA is pushing forward? I know looking at the $250 million of allocation seems like a grandiose plan, or it seems like maybe it could not be passed, but it is only with your effort that these things could be completed, or with Halo Trust or whatever else that there is that ANCA is currently pushing for. Do whatever you possibly can. The best way to do it is to think rationally, not to give in to your emotions right now, because all of these are strategies that we have to look over a time period. I really hope that we start looking at the refugee situation more closely. I understand many people really care about how the agreement has turned out, but trust me, if the people don't go back to their homeland, it'll be really hard to protect the homeland in the future. So we have to do everything that we possibly can. And I know some people have asked about organizations that do some groundwork here. I know that Code 3 Angels does amazing work, and they have donated hundreds of blankets, and I do work with them actually, so help them out on the ground level. Kuidix, another organization that delivers food very cheap to the refugees. So look up all the local organizations here that do amazing work. Doesn't matter what your politics are and whether or not it goes, hand in hand with theirs. Trust me, they do amazing work. Put politics aside and start helping the refugees as much as you possibly can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Aram Hamparian. Thank you, Arsen Shirvanyan, for all your work on behalf of the Armenian cause and the Armenian National Committee of America. We wish you all the best. Take care, be safe, and thank you to all those who listened in. And we're hoping that you'll keep your eye on all those ANCA action alerts, sign up as rapid responders, give as much as you can. This giving season, we should keep Armenia and Artsakh always at the forefront. Thank you to everybody. I wish you well. Good night.